I'll let you in on a little secret. Ideas don't exist in a vacuum. And the best ideas can't be realised without limitations. Otherwise, you just have pages of thoughts. There might be a limit of time, skill, space, or material. You could say limitations are just guides, directing an idea to a place you didn't know existed. This is a slab of blackwood, which I bought at the Lost Trades Fair down in Bendigo. I reckon there's a chair in this slab, but I just have to find it. The problem is I've never made a chair before. Well, except for my last video, but that didn't fool anyone. So I'll have to draw on everything I know about woodworking and design to get it done. Now, it's not a big slab, so to bulk it out, I collected all the timber from my stockpile which would match it. Mainly a mix of blackbutt, blackwood, and some other hardwoods. To kick it off, I jumped into SketchUp and explored as many ideas as I could think of. Some were ambitious, a little plain, others just not very functional. I realised cutting the slab into 3 would give me a seat and a back. I knew this other slab would make a good leg, and I had enough of this blackbutt to make the rest. Now my limits were set, and it was time to begin cutting. First trimming the pith off to have a clean slab, and then breaking down the seat and backrest before cutting it up on the table saw for gluing. Because of the orientation of the joint, the chair seat will need a few dowels to give it strength when a bum sits down. Despite my best efforts, some of the holes weren't perfectly straight, which meant the boards were misaligned. So to fix this, I checked each dowel individually and gave a little haircut to the offenders to bring them in line. That seemed to do the trick, and after a night in the clamps, it could be squared up to its final size. You can only tell so much with a 3D model, but playing with the design in real life gives you that immediate feedback on what's working and what isn't. It was clear the armrest needed a scale and dimension that would talk with the leg. So I ripped down the blackbutt on the table saw to a square profile, using the fence as a reference to the only square edge on the stock. I really need a jointer. This isn't a standard chair, so standard dimensions don't apply. At the end of the day, the best measure is yourself, and to work things out with feeling. So a final sit down for user experience confirmed I was on the right track. I had set myself a challenge with this project. No screws, just put them away, which opened the door to get creative and practice a few joints. There will be a loose tongue, a corner rebate dowel dado, rabbet and dado, a half lap, and finally a doweled butt joint. The armrest needs to lock into the leg to withstand the pressure of someone getting up, so naturally a rabbet and dodo would be the best animal here. It's a fairly simple joint to make if you spend the time to mark it out exactly half the stock dimensions. Doing this means a well-placed stop lock makes the cuts repeatable. For those of you who are horrified that I'm using a stock blade for these cuts, it's okay, I'm with you. I just prefer a craft beer to a lager, if you know what I mean. I wanted a clean butt joint between the leg and the seat, with no fixings from the top, so I figured a hidden floating tongue would lock it together and give it some support for lateral movement. I used a flush rebate bit on the trim router to create the groove for the tongue. A hot tip here is always emphasize the lines you want to cut, so you don't choose the wrong line when working at an awkward angle. Luckily, this one's hidden. Only time will tell whether the joint will be strong enough. In my head, everyone uses dominoes, and this is really just a long domino, so why shouldn't it work? Without fixings, I needed the seat to be fully supported on the other leg. Cutting a rebate will not only hold up the seat, but also lock it perpendicular to the leg, keeping it straight and square. Not to mention, looking pretty good while doing it. Scoring the cut lines helped break the grain, which should stop some of that old blade tear out. I then marked out the centre so I can pre-drill a hole for a dowel before cutting the rebates to make things easier later on. Just when I finished setting all of this out, I realised I had my rabbet backwards and marked the wrong side of the leg. I guess I'll just do all of that again. Just after the seat glue up, I found my grandfather's old dowel jig at my parents' place. One of those well-made innovations of the day without a shred of plastic on it. It's as useful now as it was 50 years ago. And perfect timing really, because there were a bunch more dowels to be drilled. With the rebates cut, I could transfer the dowel with the centre point to the seat, drill the corresponding hole, notch the corner, and Bob's your grandfather, literally. Fixing the backrest to the seat with a housed dado and hidden dowels was a similar process. So in the interest of not sounding like a broken freight train, here's a little montage of how things went down. You still with me? Good. I cracked the seat. I got a little overeager and muscled the backrest into place. In crisis response mode, I messaged the possum, who told me to glue it up and take the night off. The next day, the glue was cured. The crack was invisible. I think we got away with it. But like any injury, without proper reconstructive surgery, it's bound to fail again. To brace the crack literally from my own crack, I routed in a couple of strips to the underside, which, crack or no crack, was probably a good thing to do anyway, for longevity's sake. Okay, back to the montage. Because the armrest was a different type of wood, I wanted it to read like its own thing. Kind of like a constant line snaking from the ground at sharp turns to wrap behind the backrest and appear like it's floating. I cut a half lap at the corner so the top would be supported and fixed the back rail with a few dowels to lock it in square. There was one more crack that needed dealing with. As it turns out, cutting a bow tie freehand isn't that easy, so I made a little jig to make sure all the edges were straight. I think in future I'd like to experiment with different odd shapes, but before reinventing the wheel, you need to know how the wheel actually works. After a final dry fit to check if everything came together as it should, I noticed this slight wobble. I couldn't figure out why, so I called the possum. If you're wondering why he's called that, you need to watch my jewelry box video, where I quipped about getting advice from a possum. Well, my friend watched that and assumed I was referring to him. So now the name is stuck. But he is a good furniture maker, so just as I was ready to scribe and chop, he advised to wait until after it was glued, which was good advice because the wobble did disappear. Now I have a chair, but on its own it looks unfinished. The back panel needs something else, some texture and contrast to enforce its role as the anchor of all parts. Enter Naguri, the coolest thing in woodworking since sliced bread. Traditionally, this would be done with a bent gouge, but I chose the modern way so I could make this cool jig by Taku Woodcraft. I had to special order a bowl router bit, which meant waiting. So to keep busy, I looked for other projects, like turning a kitchen colander into a pretty cool helmet. When it finally arrived, I tested a whole bunch of patterns before deciding a random texture would work well with the asymmetrical angled edge of the backrest. I'm not sure what was in my tea that week, but during a test fit I noticed the armrest I thought fit well didn't fit at all. So off camera, I made another. With that taken care of, I just had to finish routing the sides so the backrest would look like a total block of texture. Clamping a few strips either side gave me a bigger surface to support the jig, while also stopping the router from creating tear out on the edge. The overall form was looking really sharp, and the proportions were feeling a bit heavy to one side. To help this, I cut a curved edge into the corner, which draws a soft line from the front leg into the backrest and gives a bit of breathing space to the armrest. As anyone would know, the trade-off building things with mechanical tools versus sharp hand tools is the need to sand every surface. And well, Naguri has a lot of surfaces. And just when I was getting into a rhythm, this happened. My newly made armrest. Luckily, the split was as clean as it could get. So with some glue and clamps, we were back on track. Well, almost. For me, testing new iterations is the key to unlocking the best out of a project. I played with a number of variations and settled on staining the backrest to really pop the Naguri texture. I mean, who doesn't like a textured black asymmetrical backrest? It just felt right. If you agree with my choice, let me know by hitting subscribe. I said this project had limits, and I've tested them pretty well so far. With a busy period at work, I found myself slowly making this chair over 6 weeks, which meant I had a lot of time between days in the workshop, thinking about each part or what's the next step. Which order do I glue it in, or what's the best way to fix that most recent blunder? In design, you can plan everything, sketch it, model it, make it, but the most fun comes from figuring it out as you go. Taking the time to test and explore, to make a few mistakes, and to learn from them. In the end, this was a simple idea of making a chair, born from the limits of what I have, and culminating in something that likely doesn't exist anywhere else. Thanks for watching.